There's a book I love, about a man who's forced to accept a job as the new Postmaster General. The first third of the book is a series of cheap gags as he adjusts to his new surroundings and co-workers, slowly growing convinced that everyone in the world has gone slightly mad. The second third of the book is a mystery novel, as he discovers that all of the previous 5 postmasters have suffered tragic and untimely deaths, and his new job is in fact a death sentence. So he desperately works to undo the curse and escape his fate. And the final third of the book is a story of redemption where, having escaped this untimely death and fully committed himself to his work, he seeks to bring down an evil and corrupt rival in a grand heist with impossible odds. This story is Going Postal, the 33rd book in Terry Pratchett's Discworld series. Yes, many people have heard of the Discworld. For some, it's a major part of their lives, a sequence of 41 books that accompanies them across many years and reshapes their philosophies. For others, it's a strange, odd thing they might have seen on bookshelves or television or in a comic book. It's full of weird and fantastical images. For those unfamiliar but keen to find out more, they find quickly that the series is dauntingly large and complex, with multiple story threads around different character sets spanning many books, and they're not all in order. Given that the series began as something of a comedy pastiche in the 1980s, it's a completely bizarre but perhaps inevitable quirk of nature that it would persist for so many years. There are several recommended jumping on points, and very few Discworld fans would tell you to read the series in its original publication order. However, human nature often tells us to go back to the beginning, so it's hardly surprising that, according to the number of ratings on Goodreads, the first 4 books of the series are the ones that the most people have read. They try the colour of magic and the light fantastic, and experience the birth of this strange creation. Then they see the energetic insertion of women into traditional male fantasies with equal rights, and then are finally fully exposed to the brilliant creation of death in this new world, and his strange existence in the 4th book, Mort. However, from book 5 things take a bit of a dip, and really it's at this point that Discworld fans will tell you, helpfully, that you need to decide what your interests are. If you like the high fantasy, you can carry on as you are, reading on about Rincewind and the other wizards and follow that story path. Most, however, will point you forwards a couple of books and suggest that you focus either on the Witches series, following Granny Weatherwax and her entourage, a saga of 11 books that run the full gamut from horror to romance to tragedy, or the City Watch books, a series of 8 crime procedurals that follow the hard-bitten curmudgeon that is Commander Samuel Vimes and his unruly mob of peacekeepers, patrolling a world that has always existed just one step removed from chaos. There are a few other routes of entry, however, and one theme that can be picked up through much of the slow evolution of the Discworld is the subject of change. As he populated his creation with returning characters, Terry Pratchett wanted them to grow and to adjust, and so he wrote stories that would work around real-world events and causes like celebrities, journalism, feminism, Ankh-Morpork and its tyrant patrician. Originally just conceived as the most stereotypical fantasy setting imaginable, was morphed into its own distinct metropolis with very recognisable features and places. Currently, as it stands on Goodreads, there are only 5 books with more than 100,000 ratings after those initial 4. Weird Sisters, Guards, and Small Gods are famous jumping on points for the respective recommended story arcs. Nightwatch, the 29th book in the series, is the most highly celebrated book in the run, with the highest overall rating, and it really heralded a new golden age for the series over halfway through its run. But it's book 33, Going Postal, sitting just behind Nightwatch, that seems most incongruous, as really this book heralds the coming end of the Discworld. Which is why, I suppose, some Discworld fans really don't take to it. 20 years and 32 books deep in the series, Terry Pratchett had long since given up on explaining that this was a world set on the back of a giant turtle. It wasn't relevant anymore. Going Postal could be written in any fantasy setting with gods and monsters without changing a thing. It just so happens to be set in this one. It's a very focused book, set around one primary character, and it follows his journey after he's captured by the City Watch, interrogated by Lord Vetinari, and set to work to earn his freedom. That, I suppose, is a very cynical way of describing the story of Moist von Lipwig, but he is, by all accounts, a very cynical character. So the problem for me with Going Postal as a book is that it takes a long time to explain emotively what its character themes are. It's quick to provide jeopardy. The introduction is tense, engaging and well written, but as we've only just been introduced to Moist and have no reason to care, save casual interest in his amusing wit, when he's threatened with execution and brought to the patrician, there is a disconnect between the new readers to the Discworld series, who are learning about this entire situation from the conversation between the city tyrant and his prisoner, and the familiar readers who are already well versed with the patrician and are clearly most keen to learn about Moist from Vetinari's perspective. But Moist, at this point in the book, is little more than a mirror. He's a shapeshifter, not physically but emotionally, a charlatan who adjusts his mood and personality to fit whatever situation he finds himself in. He smiles and nods and says whatever he thinks the listener wants to hear, either to get out of the conversation or to get something out of his victim. And this unscrupulous ruffian, not actually evil, not actually cruel or vindictive, but in fact thoroughly nice, just self-centered and uncaring. This fraudster is our frame of reference for the entire world of this book. It's not as though the magic of the Discworld has gone. There is beauty here and unexplainable events, but Moist has no interest in anything he cannot understand or control. Pratchett's famous sense of humour is at its driest with Moist. From his perspective, the world and everything in it is out to get him. He doesn't begrudge that fact, he just sees it as a challenge to overcome, and justification for all of the small crimes that he's committed out on the way. From his perspective, his victims, the people he cheats and swindles, would have probably done the same to him if they'd gotten the chance. For a full third of this book, we get to see a new corner of Ankh-Morpork through Moist's eyes, and discover the fascinating mystery behind the post office. But it's only after the halfway point that the book's real themes start to solidify, and I do understand why the few negative reviews out there have trouble with this. It's not that the opening is slow, the plot whisks along at quite a pace. It's that, whilst all of this setup is well written and full of Pratchett's sardonic humour, it's very deliberately devoid of his soul. But Terry Pratchett is a writer who cares. He cares deeply. His writing has always been driven by a sense of injustice or disappointment in the real world. In almost all of his books, his parodies are not just meant to be funny, they're holding red flags up against real problems that, to his mind, no one is taking seriously. Because when it finally pulls out its themes, Going Postal reveals itself to be focused on recognising that your actions have consequences that impact on other people. Mr. Pump explains to Moist that, though he's never assaulted or hurt anyone directly, his crimes are directly responsible for the deaths of at least 2 people and the suffering of many more. When banks fail, Mr. Pump reasons to Moist, it's not the bankers who suffer, but the poor and vulnerable who are dependent on the money that the bank had to feed themselves. That cold logic then bears an emotional connection when Moist discovers how his actions have had an unfortunate impact on Miss Dearheart's failing career. It's not that this theme appears from nowhere. Lord Vetinari is ruminating on it at the very start of the novel, but his words don't penetrate Moist's facade at all. It only really becomes apparent when his nemesis, Reacher Gilt, appears in the book. A man with all of the same skills and quirks as Moist, just without the distaste for hurting other people. He dresses like a pirate, throws extravagant parties, tells everyone that he swindles and steals his due. And yet high society loves this man for it. Reacher, I'm sure, would claim that he's the more honest of the 2 men. He fully admits to himself how he hurts other people. He just doesn't care. But we aren't introduced to Reacher through Moist's eyes. Instead, Reacher is one of several bankers brought before Lord Vetinari's offices to be informed that the patrician has set about restoring the post office to its former glory. The novel's true plot, the concept that fraudulent business dealings and corporate espionage are not just boring business transactions, but actually a cause of pain and hurt and suffering to men, women and families at the bottom of the corporate ladder, is carefully hidden behind the mystery of the post office. In another act of prescience, this was written in 2004, long before the financial crash of 2008. But Moist has to discover the true secret of the post office and come to terms with his situation before he can face off against Gilt. And whilst it's a fantastically well-plotted mystery with danger and suspense, it has little emotional connection to Moist's predicament, save for the fact that he has to solve it if he wants to survive. Going Postal serves as many people's reintroduction to the Discworld, and whilst it's a fantastic read, it's a terrible starting point to the larger series as, save for the city itself, it features no elements of fantasy that the world was built on. Moist's presence grounded the Discworld, and whilst there are still witches and wizards, they were now essentially sidelined to become technical experts. They were people who knew things, like the way a physicist knows how to smash atoms together, or a nurse knows how to treat a compound fracture. Stuff the general populace has a vague understanding of, but most of them are content to know exists and never investigate further. The clacks, Pratchett's new form of technology, is a grand steampunk-style invention that brings at least a very crude simulacrum of the telegram into the Discworld. And somehow it's no longer set in a pseudo-historical, Dark Ages, Middle-earth type setting anymore, but something more closely resembling Victorian Britain. Yes, we'd seen historical innovations before, particularly in moving pictures or the truth, where cinema or journalism plonked themselves into existence in the middle of Ankh-Morpork. But early Pratchett had always been keen to throw the fantastical around, either as an explanation, a solution, or to just ironically exclaim at the end that the change that's occurred is personal, specific to the individual characters, whilst the world at large has barely moved. With Going Postal, that is not the case. The combination of the clacks and the post office is shown to have dramatically changed society in a way that there's no going back from. Moist may have started as an idea in Pratchett's head as a lovable rogue turned good, but he became the agent of change for this new world. It's not surprising that Going Postal was the third Discworld book to get an adaptation from Sky One. As I said before, it's the most approachable of almost any of his books, and it was the first to be shortlisted for both a Nebula, Locus and Hugo Awards when it released. But how many people are really going to experience this book and then be inspired to go back to the Discworld's glory days? More people, I hope, because it's an adventure well worth discovering for yourself. Here we see the beginning of the end of the days of magic, but that doesn't mean that it's gone, or that it's not important anymore. It's just trying to find its place in a new and strange world.